to Alexa. Cormac Smith is a former strategic communications advisor to Pavlo Klimkin when that man was Ukraine's foreign affairs minister in 2016 to 2019. Cormac joins us now to discuss the moment that Ukraine finds itself in as Zelensky does another of his tours of the Western capitals with his begging bowl firmly in front of him. Cormac Smith, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Rachel, lovely to meet you.
And to meet you too. I'm all in. I do think that the Western capitals are beginning to drag their feet.
Yes. Well, look, Rachel, I was listening to your summary before I came on, and I think you were absolutely spot on. We don't know exactly what is in Zelensky's peace plan, but we do know that there is no appetite in Ukraine for land for peace. And let me say two things to underline that. One, we have the absolutely sickening and barbaric war crimes that have been carried out in the occupied territories, and every time a township is liberated, Ukraine's armed forces find evidence of exactly the same. We're talking about murder, torture, rape not just of women, but of children and even babies, just the most sickening stuff we can imagine. I was speaking only yesterday to a very good Ukrainian diplomat friend of mine, because from my time in Ukraine, I now have friends for life. And he tells me that the number of war crimes being investigated by Ukraine's prosecutor general with the aid of the international community has now topped 140,000. And this is going up every day. And as I say, many of these are of the most horrendous, sickening kind. We also know, Rachel, this is not random. This is not the actions of some out of control brigade. This is systematic, because what we have known from the beginning is that Russia's war in Ukraine has been genocidal. They have told us that Ukraine is a false country. Sergei Lavrov told us 2 days before the full-scale invasion began that Ukraine had no right to sovereignty. The second point, so on that basis alone, land for peace, the Ukrainians have shed too much blood. They cannot give their people up to that barbarism. But the second point, and you said this as well, we simply cannot trust Russia. They lie on an industrial scale. Every single agreement that Russia has made in relation to Ukraine, it has broken, from the Helsinki Final Act, famously the Budapest Memorandum, which was 1994. If listeners don't know about it, was Ukraine gave up at the time the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in return for a guarantee of her territorial integrity. Now, that was initially signed by the UK, the US, and Russia. And I've got to say that ourselves and the US sat on our hands in 2014 when Crimea was illegally annexed, and the Donbass was invaded as well. But also, Russia obviously spat on that historic document. And, we could say, had Ukraine had nukes, we don't think they would have been invaded. The other great lie that Russia puts out, Rachel, is that it was somehow NATO expansion to the east that caused the invasion. A couple of points on that. One, Ukraine was not and is not a member of NATO, and at the moment there is no immediate sign of Ukraine becoming a member. However, the Baltic states are, and last year we saw Finland and Sweden join, and we had all the same nuclear saber rattling. Finland is a great example, because Finland has a 1,350-kilometer border with Russia. What's the first thing Russia did when Finland joined NATO? They withdrew their troops away from the Finnish border. Again, talking about figures, the same diplomat friend that I talked about has said that they have now, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which I worked in for 2 years, they have counted 125 times that the Russians have rattled the nuclear saber, because they know it frightens us, and unfortunately, we back down. and we're backing down again at the moment. Sorry, Rachel.
No, you're right. I mean, the Russian bear has been blustering for a very long time. What you say about Crimea is interesting, whether we would be where we are now had the US and the UK kicked up when that took place, when that land grab took place. I mean, it's a counterfactual. We don't know. But if Zelensky was given everything he wants by his Western allies in NATO, would he be able to drive Russia out of the east of his country?
I believe he would. And there are far, far bigger and more experienced former generals and former diplomats are starting to say that Russia is in a far weaker position than she would want us, or than Putin would want us to know. The figure, according to Ukraine's Ministry for Defense, Russia has lost over 650,000 troops, as you said a few moments ago, between 1,000 and 1,200 a day. Now, to put that in context, Rachel, the war in Afghanistan, which lasted for 10 years and was ultimately seen as an embarrassment and a defeat for the then Soviet Union. By the way, Soviet Union is another word for the Russian Empire. They withdrew. The total losses in 10 years in Afghanistan were 15,000. 15,000 in 10 years compared to 650,000 in 2.5 years.
Yes, so given the multiple losses compared to Afghanistan of Russian young men in fighting a war that they've been still told is a special military operation that nobody particularly understands, how can Putin sustain those losses without the mothers and fathers of Russia saying enough?
Well, look, two things here. One, the mistake people make when they deal with Russia is they think they are dealing with a country similar to ours. They're not. We're dealing with a kleptocratic regime that's based on mafia and KGB principles. Now, I speak to some of my Ukrainian friends, and some of them are veterans. Some of them have tears in their eyes. I spoke to a chap earlier on today who defended Mariupol as a Ukrainian Marine and spent months in captivity being tortured. And he's 51. He still trains troops, but he's getting far more involved in what I do in the information space. And we're getting to know each other and seeing how we can work together. But the Ukrainians care about the fact that they are losing their best, and they're losing them every day. Putin has absolutely no compunction with throwing tens of thousands of his own people into the meat grinder. And unfortunately, and this might be a difficult thing to say, but if we look at our history, and I've been a student of history all my life, there is no tradition of loving freedom or yearning for freedom or democracy in Russia. The Russians have always yearned for a strong leader, a czar from, Catherine II, they call her Catherine the Great, right down through Stalin and everything else. So there's something that the Russian people themselves got to sort out, because most times when we poll this, the support for Putin and this barbaric war is around 80%.
Last question to you, Cormac Smith. You know Ukraine well. You told me something I hadn't really taken in. I've got in front of me a news story about Zelensky asking the Pope to help free Ukraine prisoners of war, but you pointed out that the number of war crimes committed thus far, and the ones documented anyway, are in the hundreds of thousands. Yet this war has fallen off the international agenda to an extent that seems unconscionable given the number of atrocities and the number of deaths on both sides. What can Zelensky do to make it top of the agenda again, to reiterate his concern that this is an existential war, not just for Ukraine, but for the West?
I don't know. Look, I can give you my personal perspective on this. Volodymyr Zelensky is doing everything he can. I've done about 250 broadcast interviews since about 6 weeks before the full-scale invasion, and I do this because my friends in Ukraine asked me to. After the 7th of October last year, my interviews fell off a cliff, and they've never really recovered. Now, this is the 5th interview I've done this week, because I have been pushing, and I've been doing what I used to do about 30 years ago as a young press officer, and I've been ringing up and hounding people and saying, look, can you cover this? And I used the anniversary of the 7th, to talk about the fact that Russia was clearly involved in supporting Hamas and helping them train and prepare for the 7th of October atrocities also. And, that's paid off a little bit, but it's, the world's attention shifted to the Middle East and the horrors that are going on in Gaza and now north of Israel. And, the greatest winner from the 7th of October last year was Vladimir Putin.
Of course. Listen, I wish we had longer, and I will definitely invite you on again. We are not going to lose sight of this story. I'm intending to go to Ukraine next February, and we will talk separately about that, no doubt. Cormac Smith, former strategic communications advisor to Pavlo Klimkin, when he was Ukraine's foreign affairs minister, saying this war has fallen off the agenda. What should the West continue to do to support Ukraine? How important do you think it is? I hope